Welcome to Rebecca Sounds Reveille. I am just very excited about today's guest because this particular guest has a passion for helping others just like I do. But what's very interesting about him is if you were to get inside the head of an Olympic gold medalist, what do you think that person would be thinking about? Well, really, to know what he knows, we've got to talk to him and understand how he's turned his knowledge and experience into something that really unlocks genuine greatness. In fact, if we can do that and then tie that into what's going on with our hearts, which is something that our society needs so desperately right now, how would that be to you? Would you need a tissue box, or would you be ready with such empowerment to get out there and to make changes not only in your lives but those around you? Well, that's what we want to do. And so my guest today has co-authored 24 books, including seven New York Times and national bestsellers. And you may know him with The Go Giver, and he co-wrote that with a business thought leader named Bob Burg. So today he has an absolutely new book on the horizon here, something that I think is just going to really bring the recipe of greatness out. And I'm going to let him share more about this, because really, when you understand what I'm talking about, getting the recipe going, then you'll understand the title and what's behind it. So with me today, I'd like to welcome to the show author and the man of greatness, John David Mann. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Rebecca. That was a very, very sweet introduction. I appreciate being here.
Well, I'm really excited because you've got a lot here, and I've got to tell you, many people talk about the recipe to success, but success is different for everybody. But when you think about greatness, not just success, greatness,
right?
It means something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
there's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's an interesting distinction that you make, because it's, success, you could define success many ways, but greatness, what is greatness? What defines greatness? What makes a person, you think about the great men and women of history, but we're talking about greatness, the kind of greatness that's available to anybody, not just to some famous person. I guess we're all famous in our own worlds, but yeah,
true. That's true. I'm really famous in the car when I'm singing.
And you're also the best singer in the world in your car, right?
Yes, exactly right.
I'm not, unfortunately. But yeah, what are those ingredients of greatness? And I'm sure we'll get into what the book is about and kind of how the story goes, but in terms of where it came from and why it's even called The Recipe, this is a different book for me. As you mentioned, I've written a lot of other books. Pretty much all the books I've written have been co-written. I write with other people. It's kind of become my model. It's how I do things. I like to write with others, and I'm either writing, their life story, like a memoir proper. For example, the speaker, Rita Davenport, I wrote her memoir. I was the president of Arbonne for many years.
Yes.
I wrote her memoir. Brandon Webb, former Navy SEAL sniper, I wrote his memoir, The Red Circle. Bob Beckel, who was the liberal commentator on the conservative show, The Five, on Fox for many years. And a decades-long Democratic Paul living in a conservative Republican world, and a closet drug addict and alcoholic by night. Incredible story of escaping from the horrors of addiction and from the abusive background that he came from. It was an amazing story, and I wrote that story with him. So in cases like that, I'm writing somebody else's story, and I partner with them, and that's what you call a ghostwriter. In other cases, I'm really partnering in the sense of kind of like you partner with a dance. Two people, kind of equal partners. So in a book like, for example, The Go Giver, which is the book that I'm best known for, that you mentioned, which I wrote with Bob Burg. The Go Giver is kind of 50% Bob's DNA and 50% my DNA. It's like, you know, parents and their kids. You see their father, you see the mother in their eyes and their nose and their whatever. And that's kind of the Go-Giver. It's you, if you mix us both in a barrel, that's the story that came out. And this story we're talking about tonight is like that. It's a mix us up in the barrel story. But the barrel I got into was with not a business thought leader, and a lot of my books have been in the business world, but a world-class chef. And so there's a lot of food.
Yeah. Yes, and that's what makes the title just so apropos.
Yeah, that's why it's the recipe. Because it's when he first pitched me this idea, and I have to tell you, I've had a lot of people say, "Hey, I got this idea for a story. You want to write it with me?" Which is sweet. And if I had written every one of those books, then I would be like, 100,000 years old by now. When Chef Charles Carroll, who was executive chef of the River Oaks Country Club in Houston, Texas, one of the busiest, it's an upper crust country club. George H.W. Bush golfs there. It's the creme de la creme in terms of the country club circuit. And so Chef Charles is one extremely busy man. He has been to 8 different World Olympic teams. Now there's a culinary Olympics, which is just like the athletic Olympics. Happens every 4 years in Germany every year. It doesn't go in different places, unlike the athletic Olympics. And Chef Charles won his first gold medal at the Olympics when he was 24 years old. And he's been on the Olympic team every year since.
That's incredible.
So here's this guy who is a literally world-class gold medalist, phenomenal chef. He's not a TV chef. He's not Bobby Flay or
Emerald,
Donna Shelley or Emerald or whoever. Yes. So you don't know his name the same way, but he's of that class. He's world-class chef. Mm-hmm. He approached me and said, "Hey, I have this idea for a story." And he told me his idea in one sentence. And I was like, this is 2009, almost a decade ago. I was instantly in love with the story, with the idea. And honestly, the idea of writing a book about personal growth, about the principles of a fulfilling life, about greatness and leadership and all these things with food, it's like, I'm in. That was that's all I needed to do.
Yes.
So there's a lot of cooking in the story. There's a lot of, there are a bunch of recipes in the back of the book and on the book's website and everything. So it's a real food book, but it's a real quest. It's like The Alchemist, a story of a young boy seeking. He just happens to do his seeking in a cramped little diner kitchen in the company of a crusty old diner chef. Oh, think of it as Karate Kid meets Master Chef. That's kind of
I love it. So for those who are thirsting for something really great, it's not only going to be a great read, but it's going to be something that they can identify with and really be able to consume into a personal health solution.
Yes. And it's interesting because it's, again, a world-class chef. So we're talking about recipes that are kind of on the fancy side. Some of them are very simple. But the actual stuff that you learn, the stuff of the kitchen, the stuff of the lessons is very simple. It's very basic. And there are lessons that you could apply to business, to anything from sales to parenting, to really anything, these principles of the kitchen. I've always believed this. I first read this when I was a teenager. Somebody recently posted a question on Twitter or Facebook and said, "What book influenced you the most?" And I had to say The Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth by Mr. Fuller when I was 17 years old. I read this book.
Incredible.
Fuller said, who I got to meet the man later, and he was an amazing man, but he said, for a principle to be valid, it has to work everywhere. It works in all of life. And that instantly made sense to me. And that's been one of my guiding principles ever since. It's what we say in The Go-Giver, that for a business principle to be a sound principle, it has to work in your family, in your marriage, in your home, in your friendships, in your team. And so these simple lessons of the kitchen that the chef teaches the young boy in the story, there's 7 rules of the kitchen he learns over the course of the book. They're really rules for living. and rules for it. They're a recipe for life that you could apply anywhere.
I love it. I absolutely love it because the biggest challenge that I have found when I've worked with so many people in moving forward and becoming healthier is the lack of resources or ingredients. They
Yes.
don't know what spice to take off the shelf, if you will,
Mm.
or when exactly to put it in. And
Yeah.
then is this something that is sort of a staple? And really that's what you're talking about, is a staple that is applicable in every part, because when we master it, we in turn ripple affect it in everything that we're doing, from, like you said, business to
Yes.
family to this, that, and the other. So it's our core ingredient
Yeah.
and becomes part of our character, which is fantastic. But you like parables.
Yes, I do. Love them. I
Tell
do.
me a little bit about that.
Well, I do, and I don't know why, but I just do. When Bob Berg approached me to write The Go-Giver, I like to say that Bob Berg ruined my career. I was, I thought I was like 50 years old or so, or I was actually, in fact, 50 years old. And I was on my way to Hollywood. That's what I thought. They say that life is what happens when you're making other plans. And they also say, if you want to make God laugh, you make a plan. Well,
Yes.
I was preparing to inflict divine mirth, I guess, because I had a plan. And it was that I was going to be a screenwriter and go have a career in Hollywood. And as I was working on a screenplay, and I was studying with a teacher out there, and I was making my connections, and Bob Berg tapped me on the shoulder and said, I had edited stuff of his before. And he said, listen, I have this book I want to write, but it's not the kind of book that I write. I write how-to stuff. This is a story, and I need you to write it with me. And it's called The Go-Giver. And here's the basic premise. And I thought, I don't know. I don't see this. I didn't get it.
But here it comes.
Yeah. In fact, I didn't really want to do it, but I told my fiance, now my wife, I said, it's Bob. And Bob's such a great guy. He's such a dear friend. So I have to at least listen and give him the time of day, So we went and we visited him. We sat down and talked about the book for a day. And I went home, and a few weeks later, I had a little spare time. And, Rebecca, I didn't know any parables. I mean, I had read The 1 Minute Manager, which had been very
Yes.
influential on me. I knew that.
Yes.
I knew a little book called The Greatest Networker in the World, because a friend of mine wrote it, and I actually produced it on my Macintosh. He and I created it together. So I knew that. But I had never read The Alchemist. I'd never read Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I'd never read The Little Prince. I'd never read The Greatest Salesman in the World. I'd never read The Richest Man in Babylon. I never read Who Moved My Cheese. I hadn't read any of them. I didn't know it, that world at all. But I doodled with this scene idea. And it's actually a scene that takes place pretty late in the book. It's with a character named Deborah Davenport. And she gives this speech about authenticity. And it eventually became the fourth of the book's 5 laws. And this is The Go-Giver we're talking about now. And I wrote out this speech that she gives, and it was like, writers will say, you'll hear writers say that when they're writing, it isn't like it comes from their head. It comes from the sky or somewhere through their head.
Yes.
I got to tell you, I don't know where that speech came from, but it went onto my screen on my laptop, and I went, holy cow.
Wow.
This is like real. This has a life of its own. This is like, I love this. So I emailed it to Bob, and he flipped out, and I said, this is great. And we went back and forth, and I wrote some more scenes and shouted to him, and he made comments, and we went back and forth. And 6 weeks later, we had a manuscript. And ever since, I have loved it. I've written, as I said, memoirs. I wrote, the biggest book I've ever written was this gigantic memoir of 4 different special operations snipers. They're 4 interweave stories, and it's like a huge, it's a monster 400-page book. I've written those kind of books, and I enjoy it, but there's nothing I love as much as these parables, as you said. I love this, and it's the challenge of it is that a parable is a simple story. That's what a parable is. It's a simple story. It doesn't have a lot of detail. It isn't like a novel. It's a simple story that you tell that makes a point, kind of like an Aesop's fable. It has a moral, or it may have several morals, or it has a couple of principles or whatever. It's a teaching story. But here's the problem, or the challenge. If it feels like a teaching story, then you feel like you're being lectured to. You know, if
Right.
it feels like a thinly disguised PowerPoint presentation, like I am now going to teach you my 10 principles of how to make a good sales presentation.
Right.
There's this guy
Right.
named Sam, and he walks into the store, and his friend says, Sam, I don't know how you do this. Well, here's how I do it. You know, it's like
Yes. Yes.
parables actually have a bad name in many business circles because of that, because there are lots of parables out there that are really just thinly disguised PowerPoint presentations.
True. That is very true.
The challenge of a parable is to keep it simple so that it's appealing to anyone and everyone, and it's a quick, easy read, but to make it real, to give it emotion, to have you identify with the character and get drawn
And
into the story.
yes, that was something I was thinking this whole time, is that in parables, if the reader, or if it becomes to life on screen, the
Right,
audience
right.
can identify.
Yes.
It's just absolutely incredible. And with what you have done with this particular book,
Hmm.
you've combined some things here in the recipe that is going to really garner the attention of a lot of people, because not only are they understanding the concept of ingredients and recipes, but now we're talking about our heart.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. There's a point in the book where the young boy, and that's why don't I go ahead and say this, because for your viewers who don't know the story is this: a young boy, 14 years old, named Owen. As the story opens, he's just recently lost his father, and his life is circling the drain. You know, he's ripped up inside. He's grieving. He's in agony. He's angry at the world, so he's lashing out. His grades are plummeting. He's getting in fights at school. He's on the verge of expulsion from school. So he's not in a good place. And to atone or pay for an act of vandalism he committed, he has to go to work for this crusty old diner chef in this cramped little diner kitchen. And that's where things start to take off. He doesn't want to be there. He's kind of ticked off at everything. But he goes and he learns to cook, and he learns lessons in the kitchen, and they become lessons in life. And the story unfolds, and there are some surprises and some twists and some turns, and there's more to the chef than meets the eye. And there's a history that we don't know about that we gradually unpeel, like unwrapping an onion.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
and Owen's challenges become larger than simply the challenge of cutting an onion or getting over his grief, although those are both difficult challenges. So at one point, he is learning one by one these 7 rules that the chef has. And at one point, he's also learning recipes as he goes. And he starts to write. He wants to try to write. He asks the chef for some recipes, but he doesn't get them. So he starts writing down recipes himself to try to remember as best as he can. And the chef notices this, and the chef says, he asks the chef for recipes, and the chef says, not yet. He says, a recipe's fine, but a recipe teaches you the dish from the outside in. First, you need to learn the dish from the inside out. And I think
Yes.
these rules are like that. I mean, they could sound like platitudes or simplistic rules if you look at them from the outside in. It's like the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto us. Well, that sounds pretty simple, but it's when you live it from the inside out that it starts to become part of you. And that's what the story does. It brings you into Owen's life, so that as he's learning these things in the kitchen and then learning them in his life, they blossom and take root for you. At least that's the hope. That's the plan. They take root for you as well. So yeah, I agree. It's yes, you're learning recipes and you're learning some real things about cooking. And every reader who read the advanced copy ahead of publication that I've talked to has said, I cried. I was very moved. I learned these things about life, but I also became a better cook in the process. So there's the real food part of it, and then
I've
there's the life part of it.
I've got to tell you, I think to combine the two is really incredible. How did you come to not only come up with the character, but these 7 rules?
Well, that's actually an interesting question, because You might think, and it's the same thing with the Go-Giver. There, in that book, there are 5 principles. In this book, the recipe, there are 7 rules of the kitchen, and they're printed in the back of the book. In fact, Chef Charles Carroll, my co-author, has a set of 20 rules of the kitchen that he has printed on a little card the size of a playing card, which every one of his 75 employees carries in their pocket at work.
Interesting.
And that's where I got the idea for the there is, you'll see it as you read the book. I don't mean you, but I mean your viewers. And
The audience, yes.
When you read to the end, you'll find that Owen does eventually print out this card with 7 rules of the kitchen on one side, and the seven rules for life on the other side. And you can download that card from the book's website. So when we started this book, I had an idea that there were going to be a set of rules. I didn't know exactly what they were. I had an idea what some of them might be, but I didn't know what order they'd go in, and there were some I didn't know, and some surprised me. This is both books, Go-Giver and the recipe. So you asked, where did those characters come from, and where did those rules come from? The basic idea of the characters, Chef Charles already had that idea. Owen the boy, Chef the chef. His name wasn't Owen. He didn't have a name. It was but he had the idea for the characters, and I knew he had these rules. They developed in the course of writing, and that's the way it is when you write a book. It's a little bit like, I think, making a pot out of clay. You've got some clay, but you work it with your hands. And I had a pretty good idea of who Owen was, the boy, but I'll tell you, the chef surprised me. He watching the way, and let me interrupt myself to say, the story is Owen's story in a way. It's a story of how do you deal with loss. And not all of us, most of us didn't lose our father at the age of 14, but we've all had some kind of loss. We've all gone through something, some difficulty or some pain that we lost, whether a person died or we lost a relationship or we lost a business or we lost a situation, whatever. We've all lost something that's been painful that we had to learn to deal with. So how do you deal with that? That's kind of the storyline. But if you turn the story around and look at it from the other side, it's also the chef's story, because it's also the story of a mentor. How do you reach someone who's in pain? How do you coach someone who is in a fragile state that you can't just push around or just direct or just, teach by saying, here are the rules, learn them. How do you deal with another human being who's in a hurting place or in a fragile place? And as I said, there are twists and turns. The chef has some growing and learning to do as well in the course of the story. But in any case, the chef and the boy both grew and changed as the story went. And the rules, that happened too. Some rules that I had at the beginning, I tossed out. And some others that I didn't expect kind of brought themselves to the fore. And like the last rule, Rule 7, I didn't see that coming. That's the one that actually speaks to greatness and what greatness, definition of greatness, which was something that neither of us had put in words going into the book, but it emerged. Joan Didion, the writer, once said, I write to find out what I think. And I love that, because that happens sometimes.
It does. It absolutely does.
Yeah. You probably have that experience when you're talking on the air. You suddenly hear yourself saying something. You go, oh, yeah, I do think that.
Yes. Or even when I do write, because like you, I have a passion for writing myself. And I've got to tell you, it's just really amazing when we think about how powerful words are and how powerful rules are.
Yeah.
And what's interesting as we develop, starting at a young age, we really want to resist rules. Mm-hmm. And then when we grow, we find that is really the key to greatness, because if we have principles and we have rules and we're obedient to that and we're disciplining ourselves to following those things, then this greatness within us emerges that sometimes maybe we didn't even realize that we had.
I think this just occurred to me, but I think that one of the things that makes that distinction happen, resisting rules versus embracing and loving rules. And this may not be an absolute thing, but I think rules brought to you from the outside, at least for me, we chafe at that a little bit, right? But when you
Yes.
discover a rule yourself, it's so exciting. And this just, I didn't even think of this, but it just occurred to me that the same thing happens in both the Go-Giver and the Recipe, which is that the last rule, the fifth one in Go-Giver and the seventh one in the Recipe, are not taught, but the character comes up with. The character Joe in the Go-Giver actually comes up with rule number 5, even though Pindar, his mentor, knows what it is. He doesn't say it. And the same thing is true in the Recipe. It's Owen, the boy, who actually puts words finally to the seventh rule, and discovers it. And I think that's great because, you know, I have resisted rules all my life. I have a strong anti-authoritarian streak in me. Which one of us doesn't, right? I chafe against rules. At the same time, when you discover a principle, when you discover something that works for you, when you discover, like, for example, I've discovered how I write, you know, the schedule that works for me. It's different than what would work somebody else. I've discovered, you know, the kind of food. My wife and I both have a long history in natural food and wellness. You won't see it in the book because it's not particularly a book about natural food, but in terms of what we eat, what works for our bodies, discovering that has been so exciting. When you discover for yourself what works and kind of the rules that make sense, it's so thrilling because it's real, you feel it, it's integral to yourself, and it's not something arbitrary that's been imposed from the outside. And sometimes things that are imposed from the outside, it turns out mesh with who you are. And so there could be a happy marriage of those two as well.
Absolutely. And not only that, sometimes when we embrace something, a story of someone's life, whether it's fiction or non, if we can identify with that principle becomes our own, even subconsciously, and we begin moving forward in a way that we didn't expect either. So it's really interesting what happens. And, you know, just from personal experience, I know there's a lot of different ways to read. There's digital, there is, you know, in your hand with regular hard copy or soft copy books, audiobook. And, you know, I think that a couple of things from all of the things that I've been able to learn when I've worked with people. One, you know, we each have our own learning style, and it's important that if you really want to embrace something and it's going to come out in a book, that you get the book that really resonates with your learning style. But there's also something in the context of actually holding a book in your hand and the smell of the pages and all of this going into your brain and creating that memory that needs to be there that's different than on screen. Very, very different. So there is a lot that's going into this, and I'm really excited. I'm going to guess that you have something in the future coming as well.
Oh, always.
Yes. Yes.
You want to hear about what's on the horizon?
I do.
All right. First, I'm just going to say about what you just said in terms of different book experiences. And I think that's so true. And I think it is very individual. I love curling up with a hardcover. At the same time, I love audio. To me, it was very important with the Recipe, which we published ourselves, Charles and I, which is my first experience in self-publishing. And it was really kind of an exciting thing. But it was very important to me that we come out in a hardcover, in digital ebook, and an audiobook all at the same time. So I had the thrill of reading the audiobook. I got to do the whole audiobook myself in the studio, which was a blast. So yeah, because some people really get a book on audio. Some people got to have it in their hands. Some people just love carrying a book around on their phone and reading it that way. You know, whatever, we've got it there. And I think it's wonderful in this era that we have all those options. You said something earlier, which I just want to acknowledge, Rebecca. You said something, you just briefly said, words are so powerful. and you describe the experience of reading something and having the principles come to life inside yourself and become part of you. In one of the Go-Giver books, it's the Go-Giver Leader, I think, one of the characters says, the mentor character, Aunt Elle in that book says, words are the footprints of God. Later in the book, she says, words are the most powerful invention humans ever created. And the other character says, wait a minute. You earlier, you said they were the footprints of God. And she goes, yeah, that too. So it's like, take it either way. But words are so powerful. And I think the experience of reading something in a book, even more so than seeing it in a film, but hearing or reading it in a book and making it come to life inside your head, there is something very powerful about that. But I want to answer your question. So the future, we've got another Go-Giver book coming out next spring.
Excellent.
It's called The Go-Giver Influencer, and it's another story. And in this story, in addition to the humans, there is a very large dog named Solomon, and there is a Russian blue cat named Cleopatra. Not Cleopatra.
That's cute.
And I'm excited about that. So that's coming up next. I'm working on 2 other parables right now with other authors. I can't say who, because it's this trade secret, but hopefully I'll be announcing those soon, and I'm very excited about those. If this book is proof of concept, the recipe. If this book gains enough of a readership, if this book gains traction, if the market responds to this book, then Charles and I have a sequel already in mind that we would be delighted to work on as well. So there's lots more coming.
I love it, and I'm really glad that you pointed out about the audience capturing really the reader at this point, because there's something that I've noticed. Yeah. And that is, it seems like we had this influx during the 90s of a lot of motivational speakers, authors, like the 1 Minute Manager, Who Moved My Cheese, so on and so forth, that really,
blah, blah.
Yes. But it seems like there has sort of been this delay in the business arena and in the self-help arena of really being able to capture what's currently happening with how to really get in internally and become the great being that you can be. There's just been sort of this lull. And I think this is coming out at a time that is really, really essential, not only because of the lull, but because of what shift has happened here in society over just the last 10 years.
Yeah. I agree. It's interesting. The Go-Giver came out in 2008, right at the beginning, and 8 or 9, 10 months after that happened, the economy crashed.
Yes.
And it was interesting because the economy, goes through the floor, and people are losing their house, losing their 401ks, losing their savings. It was just, terrible, dreadful time. And you'd think that there would be this retrenchment where people are now, worried about the bottom line and how are we going to survive.
Yes.
Who has time for this airy little fable about, it's good to be a good person and a nice person and be a giving person and blah, blah. That's when the book took off. The book had already been around for 9 months, but actually, as the economy tanked, sales of the Go-Giver picked up, and it did okay in its first year. I mean, when it came out, it hit some of the bestseller lists and it made a little bit of a splash, but it didn't set the world on fire. But in the years that followed the crash, it started to really catch on. It struck a chord, is what is trying to say here. It struck a chord in the business sector, and it became almost kind of a movement. People started talking about the Go-Giver idea, and now it's 10 years later. It's more popular now than it was 10 years ago when it came out, and I think that does speak to a shift in values and a shift in awareness in the business sector as well as everywhere else. I think you're absolutely right.
Yes, and it's just very interesting to watch the patterns of society and how things, how some movement, if you will be so on fire, and then, there'll be some things and some people who are doing very well, but as far as a massive movement, quiet.
Yeah.
But then we have something else come up, and people tend to start looking in that direction again. And I think really this is where we're at. We had a major issue over the last year with a number of different protests, and we've had a lot of other things going on, and people really want to bring core emotions back. And how else better to do it than in this manner? And I just got chills thinking about the way to both externally bring that in and internally bring it in with both of your writing and Chef Carroll's input. And I think that this is the right time. And even as a self-publisher myself, I know how challenging that could be through marketing and things like that. But I've got to tell you, I think it's much needed. And I'm really, really excited to see this just change lives and shoot up, up the chain of readership. I am really excited about this.
I would like to sign on to everything you just said. I'm good with all that. I think that's all just fine. No,
Well, I've got to tell you, yeah, I've got to tell you, I just have such a passion in, like I say this probably on every show because it's so true. I have a passion for helping others. And when I see something that I know can change even just one life, we've done our job, right? One
yes.
life. But when you know that there's something that is going to have a major impact, it's something you definitely want to promote. And this is why I really wanted to invite you as a guest on the show today. And I'd like to invite you back because you've got a lot to give to society, which not only does society good, but it does you good. And this is just a win-win-win. And I am thoroughly just joyful about what we've talked about today and your enthusiasm. It's so catching and it's captivating at the same time. I love it.
Well, I so appreciate this. I will. Can I close with one more thing from the book?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then what we want to do is make sure that our audience has an opportunity to connect with you and get your website out there and where they can obtain a copy of the book and so on and so forth. But I want to hear this.
Well, so because you were talking about a passion for helping others, and it's interesting because in the story, in the recipe, the first half of the book is kind of internal. It's really focusing a lot on Owen, the boy, and his experience in this tiny little kitchen, and as in the second half, he opens up into a bigger kitchen, and he cooks in bigger and bigger and bigger venues, and the story kind of opens up and becomes more about service and about the world, and not just his experience, but about his experience in the world. So I just want to say, when you see the book on the cover, there is a picture of a plate of blueberry pancakes with a single stem vase and a peach rose. This is my wife's recipe, by the way, blueberry pancakes. It's the last one. It's delicious. You have to try it. It's very simple, but it's so good. It's gluten-free, by the way. So here's what the story of this is. It's a picture of, this was painted by an artist friend of mine from Maine. It's a memory that Owen has, and I think it's in chapter 2, and he's remembering back to a day many years earlier when his father was still alive, and his dad was in, he came down one Saturday morning and found his dad in the kitchen cooking breakfast for his mom. Breakfast in bed Saturday morning. So he's down there with his dad. Dad's making his famous blueberry pancakes, my wife's recipe. And he says, what makes your pancakes taste so good? And he says, is it the blueberries? His father's like, no, it's not the blueberries. Is it the oat flour? And his father says, no, it's the oat flour is good, but that's not the secret ingredient. What is it? Is it the honey? Is it the maple syrup? And finally, his father gets down at his level and says, Owen, the secret ingredient isn't anything in the pancakes. The secret ingredient is who you're making them for. And that, for me, I get choked up when I even tell the story. That, for me, is the core of the story. That's the essence of what it is Owen's there to learn. That's the secret ingredient of the recipe.
I love it. I love it. I want to thank you so much for sharing your excitement, your enthusiasm, and your dedication to really being able to change people's lives. And I want the audience to have an opportunity to connect with you. So would you provide your contact information and where they can obtain a copy of your book?
Yes. As far as the book goes, it's easy. It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes. It's everywhere. Yeah, it's not in stores, but it's anywhere online. You can also connect with me directly and also find the book directly at my website, which is just my name, John David Mann, 2Ns.com. At johndavidmann.com, I've got all my books. You can download sample chapters. You can read about where the book came from, read excerpts. It's also my blog is there where I write all my little mini articles. I sort of think out loud in front of the reading audience. And you can contact me through that as well. There's a contact link. And if you hit the contact link, it goes to me. I'm the one who answers them. So that's the place to find me.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for what you're doing um, with all of the work that you do so well.
Back to you. Thank you so much for this show. I love your perspective. I love the way that you have so much insight into the stuff we're talking about. It's just you don't just ask questions and just listen to the answer, but you actually interact in a beautiful way, and I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in today. This is really important because we need to reconnect with some of the emotions that have been sort of lost over the last few years with everything that's been going on out there. And if you want an opportunity to not only connect with some emotions, but gain greatness, because there are some rules in there, even though sometimes we don't like rules, that I think are going to be very applicable to your life. And we'd love to hear about how it does change your life. And you can not only put your perspective and your comments on John's website, but we'd love to share and have a little bit more with you interaction wise on our TLBTV Facebook page. So it's facebook.com/TLBTV. And you can just type in the recipe and guess what? I will know exactly what you're talking about. But let's definitely share this with not only your friends on Facebook, but family, coworkers, those in the business industry around you. This is something that I think is going to really make a huge difference. I want to thank you so much for tuning in today, and I look forward to sharing more with you next week. Thanks. You've been watching Rebecca Sounds Reveille.